Hello and a very warm welcome to this special conversation. Here we are joined by our very own well-known economist, analyst, and someone with whom we've covered so many budgets over the last few years, Mitali Nikore. Always a pleasure to have you with us, Mitali.
Thanks,
So,
thanks, Bhupin.
yeah, every year, Mitali, when you're there on our budget set, we always wonder what is it that really has been achieved at the end of a day when another budget speech has been delivered. Now, in terms of first looking at the speech itself, I just want you to respond to the speech itself. Here's Nirmala Sitharaman, finance minister for so long, Narendra Modi 3.0, first budget as the leader of a coalition government where the BJP is not in majority. So, first up, from that standpoint, what did you make out of the speech? Was there anything that stood out for you? Was Nirmala Sitharaman coming across maybe a tad jaded for you, maybe perhaps?
So no, I don't think she's jaded, but I do think that today she felt like she had a very strong hand to play because I think at some level she's been through so much ups and downs. So many memes have been made on her in recent times with the GST revisions, particularly the caramel popcorn gate, if we may call it that. So at this point in time, I think today she came across as somebody very confident because she knew that in the end she had a ace up her sleeve, which was the, reduction of the income tax. And she knew that everybody is going to cheer that, which of course we are going to cheer that.
Hmm.
And I think at some level she felt that all the expenditure related conversations might take a backseat in the media today
Hmm.
and amongst even the experts analysts. And therefore, I think she was a little bit overconfident maybe, and she said, okay, I know I'm giving you a tax cut, you're going to be happy.
Budgets typically, and budget speeches in particular have often been marked out, let's say, by some shero shairi, by some couplets, by a very specific, maybe a region focused idea sometimes it gets propagated, or a specific idea which gets propagated. Nirmala Sitharaman began by outlining the pillars on which this budget was going to be presented. Do you think at the end of this budget speech, the pillars that she had identified, has she really done justice to those pillars?
Actually, Bhupin, if you notice, she started off with the same framework as the last two budgets of,
Hmm.
the Yuva, the Kisan, and the Annadata, the Nari. So these categories, and of course, the poor.
Hmm.
And for the last two budgets, we have actually been hearing about the fact that these are the priority groups
Hmm.
of the government, and these are the priority groups for whom the government spending should take place.
Hmm.
But very frankly, I didn't hear very much about any of these groups. I mean, to be honest, I tracked the gender budget very closely.
Right.
And she did not mention anything much for women, barring the scheme, women entrepreneurs and
Hmm.
5 lakh new women entrepreneurs to get the benefit of a new startup kind of scheme.
Hmm.
Even though she could have said that the gender budget has actually gone up to 8.8% of GDP this year, which is the highest it's ever been. But
Hmm.
she never actually spoke about it in the speech.
Hmm.
And then even when we talk about the other groups, like the poor, for example, or low income persons, how the government is going ahead and continuing with, say, for example, the rice and wheat distribution amongst low income groups, that's not something she actually spoke about. So they are actually doing a lot more than what was discussed in the speech.
Hmm. One other thing which caught my attention was Nirmala Sitharaman's reference to rural prosperity and resilience program. Where
Hmm.
the goal being outlined by the government is that to generate ample opportunities in rural areas so that migration is an option but not a necessity, and 100
Hmm.
developing agri districts. Now, to my mind, this
Yeah.
seems to be straight, a chip from the smart city project. In 2014, we were talking about smart cities. Should I say that in 2025, we are looking now at the prospect of smart villages, smart rural centers?
I mean, I wish the word smart had been mentioned, but she didn't actually mention the word smart. She just spoke about infrastructure. And I would have liked to see more of an emphasis on digital infrastructure, which was actually absent. I mean, in the entire speech today, she did not actually speak about capital outlays either, even though those have increased.
Hmm.
Last year it was 11 lakh crores. This year it's 15 lakh crores. And
Hmm.
a lot of it should be going into the digital economy. But again, that was not something that was highlighted in the speech. I did like the idea of having these 100 districts identified, looking at, agri productivity, looking at climate resilient infrastructure, looking at new crops and crop diversification. So
Hmm.
the ideas were all there, but I think what we will really look forward to is the
Hmm.
details of their implementation, because even last year there were few schemes that were announced and
Hmm.
were spoken about, but then we haven't actually seen details of their implementation even this year.
Okay. We're joined by PK Basu as well, another well-known economist and someone who tracks the budget very closely. We'll be joined by Mr. Mukul Bagla, too, Senior Partner Taxation at OP Bagla Group, and a whole host of other guests will be joining in as well. Right. There is Mukul and there is Mr. Basu. Good to have both of you with us on the program. Mr. Bagla,
Yeah.
let me just begin with you first, and let me ask you to respond, to the taxation scheme. Two clear views which have emerged. One view is that India is a $3 trillion economy. In this $3 trillion economy, you're giving 1 lakh crore worth of SOPs as, let's not call it SOPs, let's say tax relief. That is really a speck in the ocean. Is that too much of a cynical view for you, Mukul?
Thank you for having me here. What I would say is, Rome was not made in one day. I think things are moving, and things are moving. I would not say gradually. I think it's like moving at a rapid pace. But of course, we have to see the fiscal deficit also. We have to. There was one regime when before COVID, we used to talk about 3.5% or 3.6% fiscal deficit. We are as high as 5% right now. So we can't give as much tax concessions that the fiscal deficit goes for a toss. So we have to kind of get it back into shape, back to close to 3.5 to 4% in the near future, right? So with that, the finance minister has her limitations, how much tax cuts she can give. But I think what she has done is unprecedented. We have not seen it before. That 1 lakh crore of tax foregone in one budget, and that too for the middle class. I think it's a brilliant step, and I think we should be extremely happy for that. Yes, we can say it's not enough, but I think we have to wait for the subsequent years as the tax collections increase in the coming years. I'm sure there'll be more to come.
Mr. Basu, the argument that was being made in the run up to this budget was that our economy is stagflating. It's stagflating simply because there is no consumption. Do you think this move, which has been made by Nirmala Sitharaman, good enough to boost consumption to the levels which will bring about a spurt in economy?
Well, first of all, I'd like to question the idea of stagflation. The fastest growing economy in the world couldn't be in stagflation. If India is stagflating, then the whole. Now, regard to inflation, the inflation, of course, is focused on one thing, vegetation. That is still high, 26% year on year in the latest number. But if you look outside vegetables, then in fact, inflation is well under check. With regard to growth, we've had 1 quarter of slowdown. And even with that slowdown, in the first half of the year, real GDP grew 6%. I'm happy that we think of 6% as unacceptably slow. We, in fact, should be doing 8%. I would say that anything below 8% is unacceptable. So, yes, I agree with that sentiment. But where were the weaknesses in the economy? The weaknesses were in a few areas. One is urban consumption. So how do you address that? The best way to address it is by providing a bazooka of tax relief to the middle class, the tax-paying class. The tax-paying class has received a spectacular bazooka of relief in this budget. And for that, we must commend the finance minister for what she's done. Now, with regard to the rest of the economy, where else were the problem areas? Rural consumption actually was doing reasonably well. The other interesting problem area is, I look very closely at what is happening to various elements of tax revenue. So if you look at corporate tax revenue, in the calendar year 2024, corporate tax revenue declined 0.9%. It declined for the first time in 4 years. The previous 3 years, you had average growth in corporate tax revenue of around 25% a year. So there was a clear slowdown. Now, corporates are therefore hurting. If corporate tax revenue to the government is declining, that's bad news. But there is a little bit of a silver lining there too. Corporate tax revenue in the latest quarter was up 3.3% year on year. The previous quarter was the trough. Third quarter of calendar year 2024 was the trough.
But Mr. Basu, Basu,
what has been done for them? Okay.
But I'm saying my argument, my point, sir, is you look at the eco survey and you look at the general optics. The government is saying that corporates are swimming in profits. They're swimming in profits, and therefore they need to give more money to the salary class. And you're saying that corporate revenues are going down. Isn't that a contradictory viewpoint that I'm picking up?
Okay. Corporates don't need any more SOPs. They don't need lower tax rates. Tax rates are already globally competitive in terms of corporate tax in India. We are competitive with some of the low tax regimes like Singapore, especially for new manufacturing units, etc. And even the overall rate of corporate taxation, effective of 25%, is low by world standards. So there is no need to provide relief there. But what has been provided in this budget is a whole slew of incentives to try and get investment spending going, private investment spending in particular. And again, that is exactly the way to go. You don't want to spoon feed the corporate sector. You want the corporate sector to respond to an enabling environment. So I'll just highlight a few things. One is the substantial reduction in customs duty pretty much across the board. 7 slabs have been removed. So that is a huge positive. On top of that, the inverted customs duty structure has largely been dealt with. It's been, substantially improved. So essentially, the exporting, basically, the corporate sector is being encouraged to become more export oriented. And if they respond to the enormous benefits for exports, India will benefit in a number of ways. Now, in addition to that, I think there's a tremendous focus on labor-intensive manufacturing in this budget, which is very welcome. I say that for the last 77 years, India has missed numerous opportunities in labor-intensive manufacturing. If you look back to history, going back to mega cities, in the time of Chandragupta Maurya, he said, and he was marveling at India's remarkable ability to clothe the world. So we used to be the clothiers of the world for 2,300 years, except the last 77 years. We have vacated that space and let China take it over, and recently even Bangladesh and Vietnam. So we need to claw that back. And I think in this budget and the last budget and the labor market reforms of 2020, enough has been done to provide a big leg up to the labor-intensive manufacturing ecosystem in India, not just textiles and garments, but also leather products, toys, processed food. That's a tremendous focus on processed food, including Bihar being the focus of that. I mean, I love the fact that the poorest state in the country is getting very substantial benefits.
Well, that also happens to be the state which is a critical ally for the center.
Absolutely, yes. So that goes without saying.
One can't
ignore
the political optics as well.
Yeah, political optics too. But I'm just speaking from a pure economic standpoint. It's very good to do this. Now, also, I think it's worth understanding that, Bangladesh, the current regime in Bangladesh, has jailed almost all the corporate leaders in that country. Fazlur Rahman of Beximco Group. Beximco is the largest corporate group. You could say it's the Reliance of Bangladesh. Beximco Group's main man, CEO, he's called vice chairman, but he has basically been shoved in jail. If you look at Desh Garments, almost all the major garment exporters are considered to be Hasina loyalists, and therefore persona non grata for this government and therefore capable of being jailed. So I think it's a great opportunity now for India to try and ensure that these guys whose companies are being persecuted by Muhammad Yunus's regime, they find an outlet for investing in neighboring states in India. So the likes of Bihar, Orissa, Assam, and perhaps even West Bengal, if they can get their act together, can be the areas where the Bangladeshi uh, you know uh, entrepreneurs put their new investments,
Okay.
especially because they're being hounded out of their own country. So
Mukul,
I
would you
think
share that this sense of optimism, which is being conveyed by Mr. Basu there? Would you share that, because you are looking at it purely from a tax viewpoint, but is there really anything dramatic, say, for the much touted startup sector? Barring, I mean, I was looking at some of the highlights. There are some incentives which are being provided. The MSME sector, which has been struggling since the days of demonetization. Are you picking up anything there, Mukul?
Yeah, so if you see the startup sector, the startup reductions which they were giving for the new startups, that has been extended for another 5 years. So it's they're now applicable till 2020. So the the intention and the intent of the government is very clear. They want to promote, or they want to help the manufacturing sector as well. So adding on to what Mr. Basu has just mentioned, the corporates' profits are probably shrinking a little bit, or you can say what you mentioned about stagnation, true to an extent, but it's also because of the fact that the total demand in the country or the economy is not going down.
Hmm.
The corporate profits are going down more so because of the competition factor.
Hmm.
The people where there were monopolies of manufacturing the last few years, especially with my clients, I have seen that more and more there are more players in their industry. It's not the size of the industry is growing all the time. Every industry, I think, from the consumption point of view, most of the industries are going at 6 to 10% per annum easily.
Right.
It's just that the number of players, the number of manufacturers are increasing in every sector because they're seeing a lot of prosperity. That's why the margins are going less, and that's why the corporate profits are coming down. But at the same time, I would say the corporate tax collections for this year till 17th of December, they have gone up by 9%, as against of course more than 20% increase in the personal income tax collections. So personal income tax collections have always been very buoyant for the last 5 6 years. But at the same time, even the corporate taxes have been increasing, which just shows that the Indian economy is in the right shape right now. The best thing I think the government is doing right now is they're trying to they're trying to promote import substitution. Whichever sector you're seeing, there were a lot of imports happening. They are making extra efforts to make sure that whatever is being imported, if it can be manufactured in India, is manufactured within the next 3 4 years. I feel that most of the sectors will have a lot of Indian production and a lot of imports there. Most of the non-essential imports are going to come down in the next few years.
Okay, Mitali, the other interesting thing which I picked up is, and we were talking about the rural, the infrastructure. Look at the urban livelihood and urban development plan. So PM Swanidhi to be revamped, enhanced loans from banks, urban challenges fund of 1 lakh crore, and out there 1.5 lakh crore proposed for a 50-year interest-free loan to states for capex. I mean, these numbers appear, when you look at these numbers, they appear to be very exciting, right? They appear to be huge. But my question is this money available? Often in the slew of business channels and all these big tickers and pink papers, everyone focuses only on all these the big headline numbers, but get into the minutiae. Is there clarity of thought that this money exists with the government to be spending to the extent that the government is committing to be spending?
So, firstly, Bhupendra, I love the fact that she started off with the idea that we need to, and it was also a good recognition that we need to work on urban infrastructure development. We are nearing a time when nearly 60% of our population is going to be living in cities by 2030. and we are just 5 years away from 2030. So we need to create climate resilient cities with clean air, clean water, less pollution. So these are important priorities, and she's understanding that. So that's commendable. However, having said that, you look at the fine print already in the announcement. It's a 1 lakh crore corpus, but she has not mentioned over how many years, because the allocation for this year is actually only 50,000 crores,
Hmm.
which is, there only for 25, 26.
Hmm.
So we don't know how long this 1 lakh crore is going to be. And also, we don't know if that entire 1 lakh crore is coming from just the central government, or is it the entire corpus, because she has mentioned very clearly that 25%
Hmm.
will be the contribution of the central government, whereas 50% must come
Hmm.
from public private partnerships and from contributors of like the even debt and equity contributors from the private sector.
Hmm.
So at the end of the day, this could be the 1 lakh crore could be like the overall envelope of investment,
Hmm.
with the central government not contributing more than 25% of that, and that
Okay.
also over multiple years.
Here's the other point,
Yeah.
PK Basu, and I want you to respond to this. And I'm literally reading from, as you can imagine, top managers, top spin doctors of the government are all in an overworking mode right now, trying to give the right spin to this budget. Respond to this, PK Basu. Government will incentivize electricity distribution reforms and improvement of intrastate transmission capacity by states. However, the government goes on to say that additional borrowing of 0.5% of the gross state domestic product will be allowed to states. So, an additional borrowing in a sector where, anyways, there has been so much of criticism that there are so many freebies being offered. Free electricity. Punjab, Delhi is now going to be facing polls. We've seen this in Maharashtra. We've seen this in so many states. 0.5% of the state's gross domestic product to be given as an additional loan. How does this add then to this commitment of greater fiscal prudence, which the government
Yeah.
wants to take?
Well, of course, it is conditional.
Hmm.
Any government that wants to borrow this money
Hmm.
will have to undertake reforms. It will have to get its distribution company under control and onto a path of sustainability, not just ecological sustainability, but fiscal. So this is conditional. Okay. Now, to go back to the other question about cities and the funding
Urban
for
infrastructure.
urban infrastructure.
Urban infrastructure, yes.
That I think is, that urban infrastructure, governance of cities is absolutely crucial to the next stage. So, creative cities is a big theme for the World Bank and ADB. They are participating big time in trying to get creative cities to progress. So they will be participating as well. I don't think funding is an issue. As the big MDBs get involved, and you get some, you get the municipal bond infrastructure sorted out, there should be ample funding. But the key thing there is governance reform. The problem, you see, India's constitution is based on the 1935 Government of India Act, which was aimed at essentially empowering the central, the viceroy of India, and keeping the states very underfunded. And unfortunately, that has continued. We don't have too much difference from that regime now. The center deigns to give the state something, and then the states deign to give the cities a little bit of what they have. Now, so the cities in India do not have their own independent source of funding, and therefore governance of the cities is a big issue that needs to be sorted out over the next 5 years. We probably need enabling legislation, etc. I actually, if you go back to America 100 years ago, America 100 years ago had something called Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall, all the cities were dens of corruption. So not too different from the quality of city governance that we have at the moment. So Tammany Hall was reformed, and they began to they began to alter the system. And there was a movement in America called the city governance movement,
Right.
which I think we need to replicate. We need to have something similar coming through. So if you look at the likes of, the what is now called the JFK School of Government, the Woodrow Wilson School, all of these essentially emerged as places where, at the uh, universities, Harvard and Princeton, Penn, and so on, they were trying to get city government managers, professionals to manage the cities, and that's what these guys were training. So this is where something similar needs to happen in India. We need empowerment, though. We just can't have IAS folks who are generalists
Yes.
go and run cities. If you want cities to be run, you need professionals, urban professionals, urban planning professionals, and that is.
I mean, surely you require the right kind of people, and maybe the government, is attempting to show that it has that kind of a bandwidth. But Mitali, look at let's go back to 2014. In 2025, to me, it's appearing that a lot of these commitments which are being made now are all starting from what we were hearing 2014 onwards. So how do I read this? Do I say that this is a new move which is being made? Do I say that, this is all a carry forward, like repackaging of old wine in a new bottle? Same schemes, maybe being rechristened, maybe, under a different fund allocation. We were talking about aspirational districts. We were talking about smart cities. We're not talking about them. Now we're talking about, okay, much better rural pockets where you don't have to migrate from rural areas. So how do we, are these new schemes? Are these a continuation from the past? How do you look at this?
So I think, Bhupendra, somewhere we need a continuation also, right? Like, for example, in 2014, we had Make in India, right? And for the last 10 years, we've seen various forms of Make in India that have emerged. We've had the production linked incentive scheme, which is also technically under the whole Make in India umbrella. We've had the national logistics policy, we've had the maritime vision. All of it feeds into the narrative of Make in India. So now, so does this new national manufacturing mission feeds into the narrative of we must make in India, and then we must export from India, because exports is also a key pillar, and MSMEs is also a key pillar, and MSMEs should now play a role in exports, as was discussed today. But at the same time, I fully agree with you that we needed this budget to have a few radical ideas, not too many, but just a few radical ideas, which would have shown that while we are continuing our efforts towards improving the aspirational districts, or efforts towards improving agricultural productivity, we are bringing in some innovation. And that innovation, for instance, in the agriculture space could have been, for instance, talking about crop rejuvenation or crop diversification, and then saying that we are introducing XYZ subsidy for these 10 crops or these 20 crops. When we announce something for makhana, because Nikhil Kamath comes on a podcast and says the makhana market can be 3,000 crores, we can also talk about several other commodities, example millets, which the Prime Minister himself has prioritized as one of the most sustainable crops for India for the next decade. So, we needed to see those sparks, and we needed to see those sparks even in the manufacturing space. It's one thing to prioritize a leather or a footwear or even food processing, but these are smaller sectors than electronics, than semiconductors, than technology based sectors, which are going to take India into the next century, into leapfrog into the next century. And those ideas, I didn't hear them.
Okay. Okay. All right. Mitali and Mr. Basu, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. I'm sure it's a busy day for everybody. But the fact is that in 2025, what we have seen from Nirmala Sitharaman is certainly an attempt to maybe break from the past, but there is a lot of continuation. My only hope is this, that a lot of what we've seen 2014 onwards ended up being reduced only to political optics and political sloganeering. I hope it's not a case where smart cities or aspirational districts is suddenly now being replaced by by a new brainwave which has been created by some smart bureaucrat. But thanks so much. Always a pleasure speaking to both of you. So thank you so much.